Roll call, please, Ms. Clerk.
Mr. Boyd advised us he would be absent. Timothy Connor.
Here.
Jack Corbett.
Here.
Mike Goodman. Lorraine Cornell.
Here.
Mark Langello is expected, and Mr. Lombardo advised us he would be absent this week. But we do presently have a quorum with the four of you.
Okay, well, let's get started then. First order of business is a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we've got several agenda items tonight. They all look like they're quasi-judicial in structure. So the way these work, we'll give the staff 10 minutes to make their presentation. The applicant will be able to come up afterwards and make a presentation, and then public comments. So anybody in the public that wants to comment on any of the agenda items will be called up at that point. Limited to 3 minutes per speaker, one time per agenda item, and then an opportunity for rebuttal. So with that, we'll move into the first hearing, application number 3171, Mr. Mingle.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of order. I apologize if I missed it. Did you review the minutes from the?
Oh, I'm sorry. We did not do the approval of the minutes, so let's go back to that. Does anybody have any comments or additions to the minutes from March 12th?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Now we'll move into 3171. Mr. Mingle?
Application 3171, special exception in the MH3 district, and this is in Flagler by the Sea. And this property is shown here on the aerial, and this is in that mobile home portion of Flagler by the Sea. You have the RV portion on the east side, mobile home portion on the west side of North Ocean Shore. They're heading north towards the hammock area on A1A, just north of Westmeyer Place. You can see it in the graphic. And then the land use that we have assigned to it, and then the related zoning showing that MH3. And fairly straightforward. We had one of these, I think, within the last couple of years. We class this as a handyman. This particular business is a residential painting and power washing business. It's in Space 5 there, Lot 5 in Flagler by the Sea, and all these home occupations have a requirement that any of the home occupation operations themselves have to occur off-site. Home occupations also must agree to abide by the guidelines. We did provide as a handout that specific text from the Land Development Code. We didn't have it in your packet. We've got it here for you waiting on the dais. And 30703G is your specific regulations for home occupations. And you have those, and whenever we have a home occupation that comes forward, the person seeking the home occupation must agree to abide by those guidelines in perpetuity, and so that's kind of an ongoing condition. Remember also that in some zoning districts we require that special exception for the home occupations, and others we don't. So MH3 is particularly one of those. You won't see all of them. You'll only see the ones that the special exceptions mentioned that come forward to the planning board for that special exception review. And so with that, I won't belabor the point. We've got a recommended motion for the board that following the public hearing, based on the testimony and evidence, that you'll find that the special exception guidelines have been met. Clear evidence has been demonstrated to the board. The applicant will meet on an initial and ongoing basis the county's special exception regulations for home occupations. Therefore, the board approves 3171, a special exception in the MH3 Mobile Home Park District for home occupation at 2982 North Ocean Shore Boulevard, subject to the following conditions. A, that this special exception is specific to 2982 North Ocean Shore and this specific applicant, that ordinarily our special exceptions run with the land. This one will not, since the parcel's consisting of multiple tenants. And then B, the applicant shall at all times comply with the Flagler County Land Development Code subsection 30703G special exception regulations for home occupations. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close, await any questions or comments, submit my report for the record as the basis for any of your decisions. Thank you very much, sir.
Does the applicant want to address the board?
I don't have anything to say. I think I'm.
Please come up to the podium, please, and speak into the microphone. I need you to state your name and your address for the record.
Shirley A. Straub, 2982 North Ocean Shore Boulevard, number 5, Flagler Beach, 32136. I think I've reviewed everything and made my replies to all the stipulations and agreed to that in my submission, unless there are any questions that you have to ask me.
I don't have any questions. Anybody, member from the board have a question? No? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Does anybody from the audience want to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll move to the board. Does the board have any questions for staff?
I'll make a motion to approve application 3171.
We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The next item is 3172. This is quasi judicial in nature. It needs a disclosure. Does anyone have a disclosure to make on this application item? I do.
Mr. Chairman, if we could, I know you're going to have a conflict with this one. And if we could move this one back, maybe, I don't know the normal procedure, if it would be through general consensus. We do have, under advisement, Mr. Langello is in Orlando. He's on his way. And so if everyone's okay with that, if we can take then item 6 and potentially 7 forward and hold back on item 5 if we can.
Yeah, that was my thinking too. I was hoping to be able to pass the gavel to Mr. Langello when he gets here. Let me just state for the record my conflict. I've represented Gorell Land Management previously in this very item when he came before the board, this board, before I was on it previously, and also in our negotiations with Flagler County. So I've got a conflict and have to step back from this. So if it is the pleasure of the board, we'll move this to the back of the agenda. Okay, we'll do that by consensus. Let us then move to item number 6, which is application 3173. This is an application for review of a planned unit development amendment. Mr. Mingo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've seen this through a couple of its previous steps. It did go through the PUD. Rezoning was adopted through ordinance 28-13, I think was the number on that one, and had come through for the preliminary plat. You can see the subject property here. It's behind the sales center there, coming off of the Hammock Dunes Bridge. On the left-hand side of the photo is A1A, and so you have Camino Del Mar Parkway coming off. Will be the principal access. And then you have the future land use consistent with the Hammock Dunes DRI, the mixed-use low intensity, and the PUD designation was placed on the property as part of the former Hammock Dunes DRI. And so this approval, if you recall, was for up to a 28-lot subdivision. And reason for this application this time was principally to amend the setbacks for pools, pool decks, screen enclosures. I think we may even remember when we discussed it, the original go-around was, well, we're going to be fine. We're not going to be a problem. And then I think as they move forward, there was some consideration there and wanting to have those homes move forward. You also are eliminating the 35% maximum lot coverage, but we're leaving the 30% minimum pervious calculation, and that's fairly consistent with what happens elsewhere within the Hammock Dunes DRI. These changes are also consistent with the preliminary plat approval. And then you have also, that was waiting for you when you came in today, the letter from Mr. Michael Gill, president of the Hammock Dunes Owners Association, supporting the change. And so you have that letter of support that was there. The summary of the changes, I've got them in strike through and underline on the above and then also in your report, and presented the draft ordinance in this format. You also have a clean version that doesn't show these changes. And you also had as part of your packet that original ordinance that we had from 2018. So hopefully with all that, you have all the background that you needed. But you can see the tweaks that are here, albeit mostly minor in nature, but with that exception, we're calling out all lots, pools, pool decks, and screen enclosures 15 foot. With that minimum rear setback, where before that wasn't specified. And then you have their perimeter side yards that have changed a little bit, maximum lot coverage being eliminated in its entirety. And then you have some notes that were changed also, so that we've got some adjustments that are happening, side setback calculations that we have in play, mechanical equipment language that we had talked about as staff, and the applicant was amenable to coming in with this language. And so what we've had, if you can imagine, with smaller lots, we've had issues in the past before with mechanical being placed on those side lot lines. We won't allow typically any of those encroachments into easements. And you imagine on your side lot lines, drainage and utility easements are ordinarily reserved. But we wanted to have some very specific language here to eliminate some of those conflicts we've had in the past, having then that drainage also being routed appropriately through guttering. And then you have the deletion on the maximum lot coverage that comes in at the very end. So that's basically what we have. Then you have the site plan, then also following that same kind of range of changes. Your important consideration here with this graphic is the data table that's down in the bottom left-hand corner, and you have a larger version that you can look at. But because of us having the data table included on the site plan is also going to need to be amended as part of this action. So with that, we have a set of options available. We're going to present these very similar options to the Board of County Commissioners. The first one would be the option following approval, and to do that then, similar to what your actions have been made previously on this request, it would be an option for approval finding that the criteria have been met, 30402F, and that everything's consistent for the requested amending and restating of the PUD development agreement, the Renaissance and Hammock Dunes PUD. You can then, in this scenario, recommend approval with modifications or conditions, a second option, and that would be making some changes that you feel are appropriate from what we've presented, what the applicant has come forward as their proposal. You could recommend denial to the Board of County Commissioners. In that situation, it's the opposite, that you find that the criteria have not been met, and that does not necessarily then require that the Board of County Commissioners find that the denial is appropriate. It would be just your recommendation. We would ask if you do make this recommendation that you have appropriate findings in the record supporting the denial recommendation, and then the final option, you could table the request. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll close again, submit the report for the record, and be prepared to answer any questions or await your comments. Thank you.
Anybody on the board have any questions for staff at this time? Would the applicant like to come forward? Please state your name for the record and your address.
Robert Dickinson, Dickinson Consulting, Palm Coast, Florida, for the applicant. I think Mr. Mengel's presentation was complete as usual, so I'll remain available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Does anybody from the audience wish to come forward and speak on this item? Come forward now. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Board discussion? Motion?
I'll make a motion to approve application 3173.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Move into item number 7, which is also quasi-judicial. Is there any disclosure of ex parte communications from the board? This is application number 3176. Mr. Mingle.
Yes, sir. This application is for the Agricultural Museum, and shown here, this particular parcel, this is one of several parcels, but this is the parcel we've outlined in blue where the activity is occurring. And this is located north of Old Kings Road on the west side of I-95 and on the east side of US 1 North. The north boundary of this parcel is Pellicer Creek and the county line. And so hopefully that gives you some orientation. If you can imagine in that bottom kind of part, I guess it's going to be the bottom west portion of this parcel is where this specific area is. You'll see that on on the graphic that we have closer with this project, and so you'll be able to see a little better detail. And this particular request is for expansion of the exhibit area. As if you know about that history with the museum site, county was key in the acquisition. County then transitioned the property over to the 501c3, the Florida Agricultural Museum Incorporated, and it's been operating as that nonprofit board in place. They've been acquiring buildings, adding to those exhibits, adding to the interpretive activities that they have available, and wanted to add this area, these buildings, to be able to basically attract more school traffic, to be able to have more school groups come in, have more interpretive opportunities, create some more interest. And so that came up with this. They started some of the work and then found out that there were both permits and site plans that were needed. And so entered the county. And a bit of this is going to be that kind of retroactive fix that we're looking for with this. And so among that list of permit requirements, site plan approval by the planning board. This is very similar to what we had before, where we have a site plan approval in an existing public use. This is well established in the record. Probably beat that to death already. And so here's the overall graphic that you have. And so this, again, not depicting the entirety of the project. We wanted to have the applicant come in and show us some of the support areas. And so this one showing then along that left-hand side, US 1 North, along the south part where it's noted the main entrance, that is Old Kings Road. And then you have the existing portion kind of in that green, some of the traffic circulation that's happening. And what you're seeing in red there is actually a tram path. What happens now, that movement, if you have, especially during those busy times, parking occurring in that 200 total parking space area to the west, trams then active, taking the folks, the guests that are visiting the property throughout the interpretive areas that are here. And then our project area, what's labeled here, Scope of New Work, Old Florida Museum, is that area that's in the brown circle to your right, just above the midpoint of the graphic here. You also see noted there existing Clark family homestead. So to give you some orientation, if you've been up there, you've seen that old homestead that's there. This is happening south of that facility. And then here's that specific mix of buildings that are part of this. And so I'll read that for the benefit of the audience here, reading it kind of in a clockwise direction. There's a building that's about at 2 o'clock, designated as the Indian building, I think is what it says there. Archaeological tent down around 4 o'clock, and archaeological shed where it has some of that almost an interpretive active dig type going on there. A Spanish governor's house around 6 o'clock, Spanish caravel boat back around to 9 o'clock, and then back around to noonish there, Spanish residence house. And so that's your complex of buildings that are coming in as part of this specific application. And then you have the walks that are part of this, kind of incorporated throughout. And with your action on this would be a situation where the planning board is not a recommended, you're not providing a recommendation for the board. You are making the decision on this one. We would look for the board to approve application 3176, adopting a site development plan for the Florida Agricultural Museum at 7900 Old Kings Road North, an existing public use in that city's public park and greenway district. Maybe a little off for folks. This had been part of the city limits, had de-annexed, that's the word I'm looking for, from the city limits because of the lack of utilities. And so that we just hadn't gone back and changed the zoning. We believe still that this action is appropriate with the site plan approval as that existing public use within the context of us having the land use authority in the land development code. With that, I'll close again and wait any questions or comments. Submit my report for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Staff have any, or the board have any questions or comments for staff?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have them. So
I have one question. Oh, you have a question? You can go first.
the temporary restrooms, those are they're not buildings, they're,
Not at this time. They're going to be, they're pretty substantial. They're probably, if you've seen them at some special events, they're not quite going to be the Cadillac level, but they're going to be there. They will be pumped. They are, a better version of a portalet. They are handicapped accessible. That was one of the challenges that we talked about, is having those handicapped accessible restrooms here. The Clark Homestead site to the north does have accessible restrooms, but it's too distant for the facilities to be located here for school groups for accessibility. And so there are plans to add permanent restrooms. They're just, it's not in the cards quite yet. And there's also going to be a gift shop area to the south. There's some other buildings yet to come, maybe a future request that will come forward. This is the immediate need.
thank you.
Mr. Goodman?
All right. You were talking about school groups. Is there parking for school buses?
There is at that site, if there's sufficient numbers of school buses, they would park, as it's been described to me, to get that full experience, they would park at that 200 parking space lot there to that far west side. And then if there's sufficient traffic then to warrant the running of the trams, then those would run. Otherwise, if the school group's coming through as it's been described to me, and maybe Mr. Faulkner can pull me out of the hole I'm digging for myself, that if it's lesser numbers, then the bus is just going to take you right there, and so that I don't want to make it sound like this, it's not quite Disney World. The tram doesn't run 24/7. Well, it doesn't run all the time, but if there's sufficient numbers, the goal with this, if you can imagine, is to be able to have back to these, you can rotate through the wagon wheel, so that if you can have an accommodation for about 30 kids at once, and then they're going to rotate through. So you'll have maybe a bus 45, 60 kids. You'd have maybe 3 or 4 buses. You'd be able to rotate them through, and they'll have enough activities to be there of interest, and be able to have that interpretive goal of the museum met, so that they could do something different at each one of these spots. So bottom line is, if there's enough traffic, then you'll run the tram around that red route. Otherwise, buses going right to the front door.
I got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? The applicant want to come forward and make a presentation? Please state your name for the record and your address.
For the record, my name is Charlie Faulkner. I live at 291 Bird Road, Crescent City. And Adam, even though I missed part of it, I was kind of expecting to be the last one on the agenda, so I apologize. But Adam usually does a wonderful job in his presentation. I'm not going to take any more of your time up, except I'll try to answer questions, if you have any concerns.
Anybody from the board have questions at this time? So at this time, we'll open the discussion up for public comment. Does anyone from the public wish to make a comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Further discussion from the board?
Make a motion to approve application 3176.
I'll second it.
I call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, Mr. Mingle, we're back to our item number 5. I don't know, maybe I need a opinion from legal. If I step back from the board, the fact that we began the meeting with a quorum as I read Robert's rules, the quorum is established for purposes of the meeting. The fact that I'm not available for continuation of a particular agenda item doesn't defeat the quorum.
Well, the problem is that you're not governed by Robert's rules technically. You're governed by the Land Development Code. And in the Land Development Code, under board procedures for Planning and Development Board, it seems to indicate to me each decision of the board must be approved by a majority vote of the members present at a meeting in which a quorum is in attendance and voting. So to me, that language is saying that the quorum has to be voting. There's a language that governs the county commissioners that seems to indicate their quorum is not lost when someone abstains, but this language is different. So I think in an abundance of caution, for the benefit of the applicant, I'd want you to have a quorum voting, a quorum present and voting.
Understood. That makes it procedurally impossible for us then to proceed with item number 5 at this point.
Could we make a motion to table it?
We are, if I could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We are checking right now. We believe that Mr.
Yeah,
Langello's en route.
before we entertain a motion to table, let's see how quickly we can get a voting quorum up here.
I do have one issue I wanted to discuss with you, so if you wouldn't mind, may I go out of order?
Staff comments, Mr. Chairman, if you're all right?
Yes?
Thank you, sir.
So I was hoping to have a full board to raise these comments, but I will go with the best of the bunch. I know some of you are new to the board, and some of you have been on boards and are very familiar with the rules that govern public boards. But I thought it might be helpful to provide you with a summary of some of the main regulatory provisions in the statutes that govern your behavior and your conduct as Planning and Development Board members. For example, the main parameters of the Sunshine Law and prohibitions against that prohibit you from speaking about applications with other board members outside the context of a hearing and what exactly that means. For example, if you are at a public forum and you are there with other commissioners and someone is talking about maybe future land development code changes that are coming before you, how does that impact the Sunshine Law, and could that potentially be a violation? And as it turns out, yes, it could potentially be a violation. So what I have done is just put together a short memo that outlines the main principles of the Sunshine Law, the main principles of the Public Records Law, and the main principles of the Code of Ethics. And I thought I'd leave you with that and give you an opportunity to look at it. And then at the next meeting, if you have any questions, maybe we can take a few minutes to go back and forth with some questions. And I thought I'd also try to highlight different pieces of each of these 3 regulations at every meeting, or when the meetings are short enough and you're not too tired. And so we can just make sure that everybody is up to speed on the rules that you have to live by. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds like a good plan to me.
Okay. Do any of you have any questions that have been plaguing you I know since you joined the board? Is there anything that you've run into so far that you're troubled by or need clarification on, or no? Okay.
I could probably stall for some more time, but we did have the question that had come up, Mr. Chairman, if you're all right with the question, about site visits. And I think we had a bit of a discussion, but I don't know if you've had any clarity you can add on that.
Yeah, the rules that govern the Board of County Commissioners, they have a set of procedures that they adopted, and those procedures specifically allow you to go on a site visit. Now, you can't take your fellow board members with you, but you're not prohibited from driving by a site that you know is going to be on the agenda and taking a look at it. and getting familiar with it. What we want to make sure that you do is that you make your decision here at the meeting with the benefit of the evidence and hearing the testimony. We don't want you to prejudge any applications. We want you to be basically like a jury member where you sit in the jury, you listen to the evidence, and you make your decision based on that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other staff comments?
No, sir.
And let's go back to the agenda now that Mr. Langello is here. Turn back to item number 5, please. I'd previously, Mr. Langello had indicated that I have a conflict. I've represented Gorell Management in this very project up to and through the settlement that was reached with Flagler County. He's now here on site plan approval, and I have to step down. So with that, I'd turn the gavel over to Mr. Langello.
Very much. Is this on? Okay. All right, so I guess we have quasi-judicial disclosures. Do we have any on this board? Obviously, other than Mr. Connor. Mr. Goodman? Okay. Very good. Okay, we're hearing application 3172, site development plan, over 5 acres in the C1 district. Mr. Mangle?
Yes, sir. Application 3172 comes to us as that kind of the next evolution in the project following the denial by the Board of County Commissioners of the PUD application. This is the project area on Colbert Lane, across from the Graham Swamp property that the county manages jointly with the Water Management District. You can see the surrounding property to the north, east, and south being part of a reserve parcel that was part of Palm Coast Plantation Unit 2 plat, I believe. And this tract itself was part of Tract R, along with its out parcel that you can see there, about 2 acres and change, that I recall, 7 acres in total. That out parcel being basically that northwest quadrant of what had formerly been identified as Tract R. To give you a bit more of that history, if you recall, when we had talked about this the first time, Tract R had been an area of a density swap. There was a residential density allocated with this parcel. This parcel was designated in such a manner through its restrictions to not be developed residentially in its future. Had a C1 zoning assigned. Had effectively, arguably, a covenant placed on that property that there would not be any future residential development because of that residential capacity that was then used elsewhere in Unit 2. And we had in our history, if you'll recall, also there was a determination in the past of whether or not a hardware store could locate on the parcel in C1 zoning with outside aggregate materials for display, storage, and sales. And that was something the planning board had come back and said, yeah, that was a use that was analogous, that was allowed within the C1 zoning because there were other similar type neighborhood commercial uses. The PUD itself and land use still retains the residential low density rural estate. We think that was an error. It should have had the commercial low intensity and then the C1 zoning on the parcel. So we had that application then in I think it was actually back to 2017 on the RV campground, advanced through its processes, came forward for the PUD finally to the board and was denied March 19, 2018. Instead of going to the courts, statutes provide for a mediation process, and the result of that mediation is the mediation settlement agreement that you have with the proffer statement that was offered by the owner that was part of your packet. That mediated settlement agreement limited this development to 100, not more than 100 storage RV boat parking spaces this property. Landscaping was going to be surrounding the property, very specific in its terms. No residential uses approved. A single office would be put in on the property, would be developed for rental purposes, and then the site plan, as we've reviewed it, conforms to these mediation conditions. And so you'll see that graphic, and I'll explain a little bit here that, and you may have, if you had an opportunity to look at the TRC comments, the original intent was for there to be covered storage that would be possible, and that was the preferred point for the applicant. Ended up, as we advanced through the reviews at the staff level, fire marshal clarified that if the buildings were built that could not then provide fire protection solely through extinguishers. So while we went through extensive negotiations on the proffer statement, had anticipated some level of fire protection, and had discussed then meeting that through extinguishers, as we outlined in the mediation agreement. The extinguishers were not sufficient determination of the fire marshal in the final review of the site plan. And so what you'll see now is entirely surface parking with no storage occurring within any building. The limited office is what you'll see, along with then, I think, a storage area for their equipment to maintain the site. You have the buffers along the west side at the bottom of this drawing, adjacent to Colbert Lane, and then along the perimeter then, both adjoining the out parcel, the smaller parcel there to the northwest, and then along the boundaries on the north, east, and south, where this adjoins that reserve parcel. Landscaping plan is also part of your packet. I picked out only these parts. There's certainly greater detail in what you have in your submittal, along with the geotechnical. There was also some discussion at our level about some drainage and some clarification on the drainage plans. I believe now that those have been resolved, and that comment from our development engineer has been satisfied. And what we were discussing just before we brought this item forward in the sidebar with Ms. Stengel was that likely what needs to be clarified on this is not necessarily a determination and an approval in and of itself, but that you tie in the site plan approval back to the mediation settlement agreement. So while I had anticipated, you're going to be safe by saying your finding is that you're consistent with the comprehensive plan, the land development code, and the mediated settlement agreement, I think the tie-in that we were thinking would it's really called for the mediation settlement agreement is that now these two are kind of they're linked together. The site plan is a condition of the mediated settlement agreement, just the same as they're codependent on each other. And so that this site plan fulfills the requirements of the mediated settlement agreement, and the two, one cannot exist without the other.
And just to clarify, the settlement order says that the site development plan that is approved by the county shall include the following conditions, and there are 22 conditions listed. And Adam, I'm assuming it's your position that the application complies with those 22 conditions?
That is correct.
So if there is a motion for approval, I'd request that the motion of approval approve the site development plan subject to the conditions as are set forth in the mediated settlement agreement. I think Adam and I are probably both saying the same thing, but.
Okay, Ms. Stengel, so you're just asking it for it to be subject to or in compliance with or subject to?
It's subject to the 22 conditions.
Okay.
And according to what Adam is saying, in his opinion, the proposal does meet all 22
Right,
of those
okay.
conditions. My point would be that
We need
in the
to-
event that there was maybe a deviation after the meeting, or so that the record is clear that the site plan is subject to these 22 conditions.
Adam, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, sir, it does.
Thank you very much. Is the applicant here, and if does the applicant wish to make a presentation? Please identify yourself.
Seamus Schroeder, 175 Brandy Hills Drive, Port Orange, Florida. I am Mr. Gorell's design engineer and project manager for the site. Adam's presentation was, he covered all the main points. As far as landscaping goes, we made sure to maintain a 50-foot natural landscape buffer in the front. We did have some comments during the TRC from some neighboring folks from the neighboring development regarding the straight-in driveway. That was also designed as such. We tried to offset the driveway as much as possible so there's no direct line of sight into the parking area, but we also had to use the access easement that shares between the two subdivided lots, hence the straight line. Other than that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone on the board have any questions for Ed Seamus, you said?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
What
Goodman.
are the buffer widths on the sides?
The buffer widths are, I believe, 10-foot buffers per the LDC. Also, for the mediation, we observed...
Excuse me, could you speak into the microphone? Thank you.
We observed the 25-foot buffer around the subdivided parcel. That is the small, approximately 2-acre parcel that sits within the site. With the terms of the agreement, we're allowed to put the drainage pond into that buffer, and as per the the way it was written, says that if we utilize that as or for pond and stormwater storage, then the 25-foot buffer didn't need to be fully observed. We could essentially use part of it for the pond.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I have a couple questions for you. I thought it said in there, maybe correct me, that it was going to be a natural buffer with a natural vegetation, and now we're putting the pond and the plants. Did I misunderstand that? Either Adam or Seamus?
The naturally vegetated buffer was the 50-foot buffer at the front of the site that faces the right-of-way.
That was the only one that was to be left natural?
Yes, sir. We preserved as many trees as possible,
Okay.
but given the nature of the site.
Also, and this is really posed more for Adam at first. Adam, do we have a thing in our code that allows X amount of a parking lot to be pervious surface, or instead of it all to be asphalt? Isn't there something that we have for that?
We do have provisions that call for landscape islands to break up the.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant for some of the surface not to have to be asphalt or concrete, to be pervious and not impervious. Don't we have where we have a certain amount that can be?
We do have an alternate surface that can be approved by the board. It's not a requirement.
No, it's not a requirement. Was that ever explored on this?
Not on this, and we didn't.
This is not a parking lot.
I'm sorry.
This is not a parking lot. This is a storage area.
This is not a parking lot.
Right. It's not.
Right. I don't know if
reviewed as a
that's the
parking lot.
alternate surface had to do with a parking lot or not, so.
It is specific to off-street parking and loading in our code. So it shows up in that section. And so you'll have some reduction as to number, some alternative surface considerations, and those are all structured for board approval. Bottom line with those is that, and what buttress what Ms. Lemon said, this isn't it was a use approval through that mediated process to get us to this part. What I was thinking there was, I think we all figured it was going to be, we were going to have roof structures here when we were going through the mediated settlement portion, and so we didn't anticipate it was going to be an expanse of asphalt as much as we figured it was going to be a couple of fairly large buildings with the asphalt
So
area for the
that
travel
option
ways.
is not available, you're saying?
I don't believe so with this. If there was a reason for it, then it could be requested. It's
not an automatic.
It's not automatic.
We'd have to do a special exception or a variance or something.
correct. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
That's all my questions. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to open up to the public. Anyone in the public like to come forward and speak on this item, please do so. You have 3 minutes, and give us your name. One more call. Anyone in the audience like to come forward? Okay, seeing no one in the audience, I'm going to bring it back to the board. Anyone have any other questions, or can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve application 3171 with the 22 conditions.
And that would be, I guess, as Ms. Stengel said, would be subject to the provisions, Lorraine? Subject to the
22
remediation.
conditions.
22 conditions, okay.
Yep.
3172 is the correct application that we're
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yep, 31. Somehow I forgot my glasses tonight.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Mr. Goodman seconded. Do we have any discussion? Okay, seeing no discussion, we'll bring up the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, this passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Connor, you want to finish the meeting?
We are at the end of our agenda almost. Any board comments?
Yes. I have a board comment. I am on this board, and I am also on the, I guess they call it the Scenic A1A Pride. And I'm having a hard time understanding what their responsibility is, because at times it looks like they are trying to usurp the power of this board and the technical review board. It was my understanding that that group is supposed to just look at the architectural of the buildings that are being built and the landscaping, but they start talking about codes and parking requirements and things that I don't think are in their purview. I just want to get clarification on that.
Mr. Chairman, I think that that would be really under the purview of the Board of County Commissioners. This particular board doesn't regulate what that particular advisory board can and cannot do. So it may be that we need to have Adam maybe bring this to the attention of the county administrator and ask the county administrator what the best course of action is for getting clarification on that and potentially addressing any issues that he may find exist.
Yeah, and I'll let you know, too, that your confusion abounds, so you're not the only one that suffers from a confusion regarding what power they have, how it's enabled, and how it's supposed to be applied here. I can tell you that prior to you being on this board, we've had discussions along that line, and there's a disagreement of opinion amongst the members of the board as to how opinions expressed by the A1A Scenic Pride Group is viewed. I'll tell you, my view is they're an advisory board like any citizen board and have no more power or authority than that. That is, they're a group of citizens that express their opinion. That's my personal opinion as to how they're to be treated. I don't have anything from staff, legal or otherwise, that shows me a direct link to them having any direct authority on the decision-making of this board. Ms. Cornell has a strong opinion that works in the other direction, but I'll let her or the others speak for themselves.
Actually, I really don't have an opinion at this point, but if some policies were presented to me and maybe, I think the attorney mentioned it's really a policy directive by the commission.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have just two things. One, on that very subject, I also had some concerns about, I would say not their role, but the way that the board, that particular entity is formed and regulates itself. It's sort of outside of the ability for the county to have any say-so, and there was some question I had about, must they review something? And if they must review something and we can't get them to do it, could they hold up the procedures because they're not doing it? So that was my concern, sort of a different take than everybody else had. On the second thing, I'd like to apologize. I was at a convention in Orlando, and I somehow got my wires crossed. I thought the meeting was at 6:30. I have another conflict at 6:30. So I came here, and I got here just at 6:30 thinking I made it, and I was trying to wolf something down real quick to eat. So I do apologize for coming in late. I would have been late anyway, but I do apologize.
We're glad you made it. Are there any other board comments for this evening? Any public comment? Anybody from the public want to come up and speak about anything that's not an agenda item? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We stand adjourned.
Thank you very much.